Welcome back to Sunday School, everyone. I'm Jared Anderson, and this is Engaging Gospel Doctrine, episode 407, Finding Your Fit, which covers Come Follow Me, Old Testament Lesson 10 for March 6th. I know we only have a few days before the lesson. I will continue to push ahead. Thank you so much for your support. We don't yet have enough subscriptions, monthly donations to be sustainable, but we did have several generous donations that put us in good shape. I want to take a moment to honor the heaviness and the grief and the tragedy in this world where we take in so much information. And this increases our sense of both connection and helplessness, empowerment, and overwhelm. I know that I have been feeling deeply, deeply heavy, and my grief it's been a lot. So let's dig into these old stories and all the history that they have comforted and challenged people through. Also, these stories are pretty weird, and we should let them be weird. We shouldn't just nod our heads and say, yes, yes, that's how we got to Jesus. Also, we can resist looking for our normal talking points. Let's wrestle with the scriptures as Jacob wrestled with the angel. One of my anchor definitions of scripture is that scripture is a worthy conversation partner for our souls. Also, enjoy these stories in all their weirdness and foreignness. Notice the details. They are funny and complex and masterfully told. The points that I want to keep in mind as we review the reading are fitting families. This is probably the most important to discuss since that's the primary focus of the text, to find the right partner for Jacob in this case and Isaac, as we read before. And it's worth pushing back on. And also the very important and nuanced question of how do we distinguish between gospel principles and cultural conventions? What is our mindset? We are going to look at the mindset of Jacob, of Laban, of Esau, of Isaac, of Rebekah. And how do we navigate healthy relationships? We have lots of examples of dysfunctional relationships in this reading. How do we update and forgive, which is perhaps an unexpected invitation from the story of Jacob and Esau? And then I want to talk about intergenerational trauma and healing. Quick overview: in Genesis 24, Abraham secures a wife for Isaac. Rebekah shows her character. In 25, Abraham dies. Jacob and Esau are born. Esau trades his inheritance for lunch. In 26, Isaac fights over wells and follows the tradition of passing off his wife as his sister. She was his first cousin once removed. And then in 27, we have Rebekah and Isaac plotting to steal Isaac's blessing from Esau. The trickster is a foundational archetype, both in literature and myth and folk tales in general, and also the Bible in particular, and the patriarchal narratives in extra particular. And then we have the reading for this upcoming Sunday School Sunday. In chapter 28, we have Jacob's Dreamtime Stairway to Heaven. In chapter 29, we have very long engagements between Jacob and Leah and Rachel, who are straight up Jacob's cousins. In chapter 30, we have very complex conceptions by both people and animals, the wives and the concubines and the sons and flocks of Jacob. In chapter 31, we have more family feuds and idol drama. That's idol, not idol. And note the signs of older forms of Israelite religion, which is pretty cool. In chapter 32, Jacob prepares to meet Esau with a lot of trepidation and wrestles with an angel. And then in 33, we have reconciliation between Jacob and Esau. A few notes on the past episode that I missed, and I apologize for that. One of the most important lessons from Genesis 19, from the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, is to understand that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not a story about homosexuality. It's a story about hospitality. Genesis 19 is very, very dark humor. At the end of the chapter, as you know, if you read carefully, Lot's daughters get him drunk and rape him. So there's this theme of rape and improper relationship in this chapter. And as Ezekiel 16:49-50 clarifies, the sin of the Sodomites was not sodomy as we think about it now, which is a weird term and idea anyway, but a failure of hospitality. It says they did not feed the poor and needy. I'll link to the older episodes on those. And then 22, we have the binding of Isaac. Again, I'll link to those episodes. Rich, poignant, powerful, tragic. And there's a poem I came across this last week, written around after World War I, that tells the story of the binding of Isaac, except it's sacrificing the youth of Europe. Again, hopefully we don't get to those points. Let's dig into more detailed notes. Genesis 24 is the longest chapter in Genesis. So Abraham is securing a wife for Isaac. Note that Isaac is largely a passive character, and Rebekah derives the narrative. Here we have, again, the themes of hospitality and dedication. How do we treat each other? What are our obligations and our responsibilities toward each other? These are fundamental themes of Scripture. In chapter 25, Abraham dies, Jacob and Esau are born, and then we have this Esau trading his inheritance for lunch. I used the Jewish Study Bible in my preparation, and the translation is really great. He says, "Let me gulp down that red stuff." Very earthy translation. I really liked it. Yes, this is a good time to reflect on whether we are investing in our longer-term goals or focused on our appetites, but we should also take a careful note of the theme of Jacob as trickster. Plus, this isn't binding. Isaac still tries to give Esau the birthright, and it is only compromised through even more trickery. Another lesson here is that we think more clearly when we're not hungry or hangry. We need to take care of our bodies. There is such power in taking care of our bodies. If you're feeling down, take a nap, eat a snack, take a deep breath, settle into your body. At any moment, no matter what you have going on in your life, you can take a moment to feel what your body is feeling. This is a central point of the staff wellness interventions that I do at work. For example, when you are washing your hands, feel the temperature of the water, feel the texture of the soap. I just made homemade bread, so the house still smells good. But when you're eating, take a moment to put down your fork or spoon, actually experience what you're doing. Being in your body helps you metabolize stress and trauma in really powerful ways. In chapter 26, Isaac fights over wells and follows the family tradition of passing off his wife as his sister. She was his first cousin once removed. And then in chapter 27, Rebekah and Isaac plot to steal Isaac's blessing from Esau. This brings up an interesting theological question of the interaction of God's blessings and our own actions and interactions, intentions, even mistakes. I think we need to be wary of the idea of salvation history, the idea that things need to turn out a certain way in order for God's plan to be fulfilled, which is how the Bible is broadly framed. it's indisputable that humans write stories that explain and justify their behavior and explain how things turn out. When it comes to blessings, I personally like thinking of it as being in alignment with the principles that facilitate those blessings, as Doctrine and Covenants 130 explains, being in proper alignment with the principles of the gospel. Chapter 28, we have Jacob's Dreamtime Stairway to Heaven. Note in these chapters the signs of older forms of Israelite religions. We have the sacred stone pillars. We have temples in different locations. We have the family gods. The stairway is likely an allusion to the ziggurat, which are Mesopotamian pyramids, at the top of which divine communion was believed to occur. And so Jacob has this theophany, this experience with God where there's that renewal of covenant. In chapter 29, these very long engagements, there are valid lessons on diligence and working hard toward worthy goals. And one insight that strikes me in this Laban-Jacob dynamic is working within problematic systems. One thing that I feel most passionate about is I feel called to infiltrate systems of power and privilege and subvert them with well-being and goodness. And so I've worked at the prison. I want to get into the military. I want to get into first responder chaplaincy. I mean, these are incredibly difficult, complex areas of human and cultural and institutional behavior. And you see, or we read, how Laban and Jacob are kind of trying to outfox each other, and God plays an interesting role in that. Chapter 30, we have, again, these very complex conceptions by both people and animals, and I'll make the argument that Laban and Jacob are both in pretty problematic mindsets. And so, they're a little bit doomed to failure, like play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And they're very, very much in a what can I get out of this? They're family relationships, but they're very much in a business mindset. And I think that's one explanation for, why things aren't very pretty. Note the cultural values at play in these chapters. This is very, very important. You have the idea that the firstborn is the one who gets the inheritance. That's primogeniture. We have the need to marry within your people, endogamy. Bearing children is the primary purpose of women, of marriage, etc. Women are functionally property. Also slavery, since Jacob is functionally an indentured servant, which is why he needs to ask Laban's permission to leave. There are also lots of complex feelings and preferences. Jacob loving Rachel more than Leah. In my family growing up, we'd say, I love you and I like you, indication that loving and liking don't always go together. And it's also worth remembering that until quite recently, marriage was primarily political and economic, with emotions being only secondary. For most of human history, marriage was the most, or civilization at least, marriage was the most effective and efficient ways to transfer resources across generations and across families. It's not romantic and it's not pretty, but we need to take these cultural conventions and norms seriously so that we can wrestle with them. So again, in chapter 31, we have these family feuds. There's that really funny story with Laban's idols. Note the theme that Jacob makes economic arguments and Laban and later Esau argue based on relationship. Of course, both Laban and Esau are tricky and arguing in a way that makes them look good. Okay, everyone listen. Pay attention to behavior and patterns. Our words reflect what we want to be true. Our actions reflect what is true. So pay attention to behavior. And we are often deluded about our patterns. So for example, starting in verse 36, then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled before my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night." Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set up a pillar. These stone pillars were sacred ritual objects that represented the presence of deity. So again, lots of these older Israelite religious forms. And again, this is very sophisticated writing where both Laban and Jacob are making arguments that make them look and sound good. But if you go deeper, you can see that they have money on mind. It's very economic. It's very transactional, more than relational. So in chapter 32, Jacob is anxious. He notices his brother's military strength, and he spends the entire chapter rallying all his resources to placate his brother. Jacob wrestles with the angel, demands a blessing, sets up an altar. And then plot twist, in chapter 33, Jacob doesn't seem to shake his manipulative, money-centered approach. He's still bargaining, whereas Esau is genuinely relationally centered. As Michael Austin comments in a By Common Consent post, Jacob here acts like someone who has been given a surprise gift, and rather than appreciating the gift for what it is, insists on going out and buying something of equal value to avoid having to be in debt. As Esau points out himself, it is unnecessary, and it changes the entire nature of the relationship from fraternal affection to economic transaction. Jacob cannot simply accept forgiveness as a free gift. He must try to purchase it with the coin of the realm. And when Esau tries to engage his brother as a brother, saying, "Let us journey on our way and I will go alongside you," Genesis 33:12, Jacob brushes him off. Having escaped the noose, Jacob shows no interest in having a brother. This is the text that this is the trick that the text plays on us. Esau, not Jacob, becomes the Christ figure in the story, the one who initiates reconciliation by offering unconditional forgiveness to someone who has wronged him grievously. Jacob is the unrepentant sinner who doesn't want to be punished, but who cannot accept a simple offer of grace and tries to purchase his brother's forgiveness with a bunch of goats. Close quote. So Jacob is so afraid, and he spends a great deal of effort to protect himself from his brother, yet he is in such a defensive mode that he is not prepared for grace and does not reciprocate or open himself to it. He stays transactional. And so it makes you wonder whether even his affection for Rachel, whom he works so long for, may be more about her, the way that she pleases him, or his attraction to her rather than valuing her as a person. So let's get into our discussion points. So fitting families. This is a really tricky point, and it's so important. One of my very favorite things about working in end of life is that I get to see how people show up for each other, as I've mentioned. And there is nothing more beautiful than seeing end of life love stories. And the person that you pick does matter. I think what matters even more is the mindset, the relationship skills, what you bring to the table. David Schnarch has a fabulous book called Passionate Marriage. And in the beginning, he talks about differentiation, remaining yourself while close to someone else. And it's important to name, again, that our culture, especially Western American culture, has a very immature, infatuation, codependent, new love approach to relationships. Very superficial in every sense. Like find that right person and it's happily ever after. Whereas that's not the case. So it's so important to remember that it is true that life is about fit, whether it's a romantic partner or another relationship or a job. It's like, what is your fit? I am dedicating my life to my nonprofit work through the Alam Institute. And also, I want to do wellness coaching. More and more, I'm going to focus on that. And I really believe it comes down to discerning what you are and then realizing the best version of that. I playfully say that the secret to changing is realizing you don't have to change. And that's a little bit playful because we all do need to improve, and we can improve. But in a very real way, we don't need to become different. There's such a beautiful, loving grace to the idea of discerning what we are, coming to know ourselves, coming to love ourselves, and then becoming that and finding out where you best fit. In fact, I think that finding where you best fit is one summary of the purpose of life. There's nothing more satisfying than being well used. And I use used in a deeper ethical sense, not exploited. And similarly, when we ask ourselves what makes the right fit when it comes to relationships, for example, yes, shared culture and experience can give us a head start, and often we meet people because of those shared social spaces, but relationship skills, emotional maturity, and attitude are the most important. I think the pillars of a healthy relationship are cooperation, communication, and adaptability. We need to be on the same team. We need to approach challenges as allies, as partners, being on the same team. And then communication, we have to know ourselves well enough and be courageous enough and have enough emotional fortitude so that we can be honest. I asked a 101-year-old for life advice, and she said, always tell the truth, it'll come out eventually. And so I call honesty being in proper alignment with reality. And we need to communicate clearly. Now, of course, there's like graciousness and kindness. Like my personal guideline for honesty in relationships is that a relationship should be able to bear the full truth spoken as gently and lovingly as possible at the best moment possible. And there are nuances there. Deception is a big theme in this lesson. We talked about this a lot in hypocrisy. In the hypocrisy New Testament episode, a good rule of thumb about honesty and disclosure is, are you communicating carefully for the other person's benefit or your own benefit? If you are speaking carefully around the truth to try to get out of consequences, that is not good. If you are speaking carefully to give everyone the best chance of having a positive outcome and maintaining loving relationships, I think that can be defensible. And my ethical equation is that every action should be defensible to the ideal version of all of those impacted by that action. Okay, let's talk about culture a little bit. I have taken both interreligious chaplaincy and intercultural chaplaincy. My divinity degree emphasis is actually on intercultural chaplaincy. And I've really enjoyed the invitation to really figure out who I am and where I come from. I did 23andMe. I love that genetic breakdown. That's so cool. Shocking. I'm white, very 99.9% Western European, very Danish in the Copenhagen region, and UK in the London region. So my ancestors were very capital people. So I really liked this one quote summary about human difference. And this is by Emmanuel Larty. And he said, all humans are like all other humans in some ways. These are human universals. We all need to eat, we all need, we have the basic physical needs. All humans are like some other humans in some ways. That's culture and so forth. And then all humans are different from all other humans in some ways. Every single one of us is distinctive, and there is no one like us. And so I love that balance of, yes, there are human universals, and yes, there are important ways that each one of us is distinctive and like no one else, but there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of commonality. And this is why I like anchoring relationship in process. Yes, similar values are important, but the skill to respect and communicate across differences creates a more solid foundation. I call this safety in process, not point. Because in intimate relationships, such as marriage, we will hurt each other. We will betray each other, maybe not in the big ways, maybe in the big ways, but we need to be able to show up to each other. And we'll talk about forgiveness in just a bit. So again, how do we show up to the process of healthy relationship? Next, how do we distinguish between gospel principles and cultural conventions? This reading is a good opportunity to name the fact that, yes, for example, Jacob is an indentured servant to his uncle Laban. And we can name the fact, wow, people in the Bible come from a very different culture than we do. They have different cultural norms. In fact, the focus of my biblical studies was the history behind the Bible, how the Bible came to be, how it was composed. I moved a lot of my biblical books and put them in boxes so I can actually move the books from the floor to my bookshelves, shifting from my biblical studies books to pastoral chaplain books, which I love, and lots about human nature and wellness. So at this point, it's worth naming and saying, in what ways did you notice that the culture of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah and Rebekah, and Rachel and Leah, how is their culture different than our culture? And that can lead to a productive discussion, in what ways might our culture of our day be different than the principles of the gospel? Okay, what is our mindset? I love, 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 love the principle of mindset. And the way that we think about things and the narrative that we use in our minds, the stories we tell, is a matter of life and death. Our mindset, our framing, not only almost determines outcome. This is called priming. It's behavioral economics, or rather the insights of behavioral economics. So, for example, because Laban and Jacob were in such a transactional mindset, they couldn't get out of that. They couldn't actually be in that relationship of grace that Esau ended up being in. So also, the stories that we tell, the way that we think, our mindset literally changes the way that our bodies process experience. So one of the main things that I emphasize in my wellness work is to clean our stories and be very matter of fact as we describe what's happening and what we're feeling. As we've discussed, I think that suffering is pain plus resistance plus story. So as we release that resistance and as we let go of our stories, we can allow healthier stories to organically grow. So this is interesting that Esau is more embodied and emotional and passionate, but in the end more gracious. And Jacob is more calculating in all senses of the word. Next, how do we navigate healthy relationships? We have to do our own work. We have to train ourselves so that we can emotionally regulate ourselves. And then we need relationship skills. I have 6 words for you. An ideal way to respond to any situation is curious, compassionate, acceptance. We need to take seriously what's real and not avoid it. We need to stay curious, okay, how is this working and what's going on here? And then engage with compassion. And then that's at the assessment stage. And then in the follow-through stage, it's healthy and powerful to be clear, gentle, and firm. How do we update and forgive? This is the heart of the gospel, right? And the story, the tension, the friction, the conflict between Jacob and Esau, twin brothers, is at the heart of this story, and it is such a powerful thing to discuss. Forgiving is for us. Love and forgiveness and grace enables us to heal the poison from our own souls. It's worth noting that anger is not necessarily negative. Anger can be powerful. Anger is love in motion in the face of injustice. Also, forgiving does not mean trusting again. And one of the most tragic points of the story that we're reading is that Esau was in a forgiving, reconciling mindset and soul alignment. And I don't even know that Jacob noticed it. He was so afraid. He was so calculating. He was purchasing his safety. And he didn't even see that that was not necessary. And even more tragically, he lost out on the chance for reconciliation and grace. Finally, we see this theme of intergenerational trauma and healing. Orson Scott Card has a series, Women of Genesis, which is very powerful around these stories. And you kind of, even in the biblical text, you kind of get the sense that Isaac never recovers from his experience with his father. And I've mentioned one of my favorite quotes by Will Smith where he says, "Not my fault, my responsibility." And among their many other lessons, these stories invite us to get to know where we come from and get to know our ancestors. And I'm really grateful for services like 23andMe that no matter what our background is, no matter our ability to do our genealogy, we can have a sense of where we come from. And that's very powerful. And I want to research more about my ancestry and be more connected. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful part of Latter-day Saint culture. We need that courage to name the trauma and the damage and the wounds and the patterns and the habits that we have in our body. Science is showing us, this is epigenetics. Science is showing us that we can literally inherit trauma. We can inherit good things and bad. And so the way to be saviors on Mount Zion, the way to be saviors in our own line, is to name the trauma and the pain and, again, the patterns, and then do what we can to heal them. I have mentioned before that one of the things that I most celebrate is the fact that even though I have a lot of issues around love and feeling loved and worthy, my children all feel loved. And I am deeply, deeply grateful for that. So I pray that all of us can name our issues, we can bring compassion, we can do that work of healing so that our future selves are healthier and more compassionate, but also those that we interact with and those who come after us are also more healed and more open to grace and relationship because of the work that we do. So next lesson for the 13th, we have Genesis 37 to 41. Then the 20th, the next time we have Sunday school, Genesis 42 to 50. In other words, we have the Joseph story, which is a tight little novella. And I'll work to get that out by next week. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Engaging Gospel Doctrine. And again, thank you so much for your support of the podcast. I am really coming down to the wire with everything else going on in my life, but I take seriously your support of the podcast, both emotional and financial, and I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I will continue to make time for it. Thank you.